Hi guys, and welcome to the fifth video of Chapter 3, that is Module 2, in which we're going to finish up our tidying up our application with the two buttons. So let's get started. You may remember, um, let me get back to our storyboard here. We had uh, set up our left button and our right button, and we had fixed the uh, errors we had so that when we run it, we can see all the text, and the action methods we wrote change the contents of the label by means of accessing its outlet. And we had one little problem, which was the issue of things not sort of showing up centered and in the right place on the screen. And as soon as the simulator comes up here and we look at it, we'll work on starting to fix that. You'll notice that the left button's sort of where it belongs, but the right button's not. We'd like things, and we'd like it to work sort of regardless of what phone we're running. This is an iPhone 8, but on a much smaller, say, iPhone 5, things would look weird. So that's what we're going to look at doing next. And we're going to add what are called some constraints. I've already done it here. I'm going to delete these and we'll re-add them. You can find constraints in the size inspector of um, for a particular control. But what constraints are is they specify how a control ought to relate to to another control, and you can specify with both respect to a control in the view that encloses it or to between two controls. We're going to specify all the constraints we need to make here by relating our three controls, the label and the two buttons, to the view which encloses them, the edges of the view. One thing I haven't mentioned before is this safe area. That's this region right here in the screen at the top where you're not supposed to intrude because other things from the operating system use it up. So let's first of all add the constraints for the label. And we'd like the label to be centered horizontally, that is as much space here as here, no matter what phone model we're on. And we'd like it sort of close to the top. And we'll fix it. We're going to fix sort of the pixel distance that's a small distance so that it'll be kind of near the top regardless of what phone we're running it on. So the way you do that is you control drag, the same technique we use for putting in outlets and action methods, except instead of control dragging from the control into code, we're going to control drag from the object to its underlying container. And in this, and you get a set of things you can constrain. Now we need to set a number of constraints here, so I'm going to do this a couple times. Another way you can do this is instead of just clicking on one of these, shift clicking on it. So the first thing I'm going to set is I'm going to constrain the top space to the safe area so that it'll be sort of the same as it is now on any other phone. I'll click on that. And I didn't shift click so it goes away. And some things have happened. A constraint section has shown up here in the hierarchical description of the storyboard. And under the constraints section, this constraint has been entered. If I click on it, it'll show me up here what that constraint means. It's a top alignment constraint between the status label and the safe area at the top. And the relation is that the distance between them has to be equal to this constant. Now, for some reason, we decided later on we didn't like this constraint, but we didn't want to completely throw it away. We can unclick the installed here and get rid of it. So a couple ways you can select that constraint. You can either select it here in the list, or you can select it here um, in the storyboard itself. And it'll either show you the constraint here in by itself, or if you select the button itself, it'll show up as part of the properties inspector. And here's a constraint. Now it only applies to this size class. Now size classes are different, like an iPad is a different size class than an iPhone. We're going to push that issue off to the future. But for now, we're going to say that we're going to align this control to the safe area at a distance of 39. We're also going to center this control horizontally with respect to the safe area. So again, I will control drag to the safe area, and now I'm going to center horizontally. Oops, it looks like I centered vertically. So I want to undo that. Let me try it again. The center horizontally in this space, safe area. And it did not like that, that constraint at all. So let me get rid of it again. Select that, and I'm centering. Oops, I didn't want to move it. It's because okay, so I put it back in the wrong place. Now this is a good, I'll get back to adding my other constraint, but you see that the constraint's now in orange, and I've got a warning label up here. The warning is that the horizontal position is ambiguous, and the leading and trailing constraints are missing. This is also not where it belongs. So I could either move it by just dragging and dropping it back to trying to get it where it was, and maybe I succeed and maybe I don't. There's also a button down here to update frames. That puts it back where it belongs. If this control here, and again, I find these controls utterly confusing. You just have to memorize it if you want to use it. This control for updating frames will make things on the storyboard consistent with things in the constraints, if that's possible. So if the way things are laid out on the storyboard doesn't match up with what you're telling the constraints they should look like, that's a way to fix it if that can be done. Let's try again to center this. And once again, let me undo that. Just that's another way to get rid of the problem. I'll control drag. I want to center it horizontally in the safe area. Okay. I think that's working for me. Um, let's preview that. There's a way to preview what things are going to look like as you're setting up constraints. You see here we have another constraint that got entered for the one I just put in, and it's here. Let's see what this is going to look like in the iPhone 8, and we'll pull up our assistant editor to do it. What you do to get it is here you select preview under the assistant editor symbol, which is these two overlapping circles, and it looks like it's centered appropriately on an iPhone 8. That's nice. If we want to look at it on another phone model, there is a plus button down here. Let's look at it on just, I don't know, let's look at an iPhone 4S and see what that. Actually, that's silly because it won't run on an i4S. We can see that the no button pressed went in the right place on an iPhone on the iPhone 4S, even though the left and right buttons are wrong. But we haven't set up any constraints for those yet, and it looks like our label field isn't wide enough in the landscape mode. We're going to spend a whole chapter on rotations, so don't worry too much about the landscape modes yet. But we'll get rid of those. And let's go back and add some constraints for these buttons. Now this one, we'll control drag it to the side of the container. So we want to set its leading space there, and we want to set it centered vertically. That's no good, so let me kill those constraints. And we can see it's out of position there. And we're going to tie, again, its leading space to the safe area. And I think we've got things the way we want, but we need to update the frames to, oh no, it's centering it in the X dimension also. Let me delete that. And drag it over here. I can. You let me do that? Yep. And we'll set the distance here. So let me control drag that there, and we are going to set its leading space to be fixed there. We'll update frames, and the left button is where it belongs here. It's centered vertically, and its distance to the left edge is fixed. We'll do the same with the right button. Control drag it to the frame, and we're going to set its trailing space. The space to the left of the control is called the leading space. The space to the right is called the trailing space. The space above is the top space, and the space below is the bottom space. And we need to also center this vertically in the safe area as well. And put it where it belongs, so we don't need to modify, to update the frames here. Other ways we could look at the constraints that exist would be to select something and click down here, and this actually lets us add new constraints. This symbol that looks like, I don't know, a TIE fighter in Star Wars or something, you can specify what, if you want to, specifying constraints to the next thing, or that the width and height are certain things, or that the aspect ratio is a certain way, or that you want to align things. So you can create constraints down here as well. But for the kinds of sort of dimensional constraints we're setting, the way we did it earlier is just fine. Before we run again, I'm going to go up here and fix this. I'm going to change the width here from 116 to about 150 to make it wider, but I'm not going to change anything else. And what you'll see is that it'll just, in a very centered, nice way, change that one. Well, actually, it didn't just change it. I have to, let's fix the constraints again. And oh, I was changing the position. I should have been changing the width. Let's make this like 180. And it narrows it when it moves it back in. So I'm going to have to figure out some other way to make that wider. But now what will happen is if we look at other orientations, things sit where they need to sit. That works for this kind of an application. It's not going to work for every application. If we look at another phone, in this case I think we've got an iPad Pro in landscape. Things are still where they need to be. If we go to an iPhone SE, things are where they need to be. Let's change our orientation right. And things are pretty robust now in terms of um, supporting those constraints. You can add constraints in code as well. You'll create instances of the NS or next step layout constraint class. We're not really going to go over that in the class. Everything that we need to do, we'll be able to sit here using the auto layout and auto sizing features that are built in. And again, multiple ways to add a constraint. You can either control drag, or you can use select the control you want and go down here and add a new constraint. If you want to see all the constraints that are in place, they're listed here in the hierarchical um, uh, description of the scene. If you select a control, you can see the constraints that are specific to that particular control by going to the size inspector and looking at those constraints. And you can edit them or delete them if you need to from here. So if you want to make the picture here in the layout editor look like your constraints, you use the update frames button. If you've got problems with your constraints and you'd like to change the constraints to match the picture, resolve auto layout would be the button you would use. If you want to line up things, you can use this button, and we're not going to fool with the embed in stack thing. If you want to change what device you're looking at here, you can either change it down here, or you can, with the assistant editor, pull up the preview part and change it that way. Well, that really finishes what we wanted to do with alignment, and this application is now sort of running the way we wanted to run. Let's go ahead and run it just to sort of verify that things are looking right now, that we previewed it, but we haven't actually run it in the simulator. But now we're running it in the simulator, and in fact, everything's behaving properly. So that finishes up Module 2, which covers Chapter 3 of the textbook, and I'll see you in the next video.